Wow. So I've been doing these live sessions for almost 2 months now, and I had my first big technical glitch where I just talked for, I don't know, 4 minutes, 3 minutes maybe on mute. So let's give that a go again. So a common question that can trip up HR teams on the I-9 is when an employee hands you an I-94 record. So is that a List A document, a List C document, or is it neither? And the honest question really depends on that person's immigration status and the other documents that they're presenting to you. So welcome back to Immigration Compliance Corner. My name is Emily Brown. I'm the founder and principal attorney of Elevate Justice U.S. Immigration Law. And we are a nationwide law firm specializing in immigration compliance and federal litigation. We come live to you every Wednesday to discuss topics related to immigration compliance, so I-9 and E-Verify, or also visa-specific compliance requirements. As always, before we get started, everything I'm sharing today is general educational information only. It is not legal advice. Immigration law changes frequently, so for guidance tailored to your business, be sure to consult a qualified immigration attorney. So what is the I-94 record? The I-94 record is a document that essentially tracks when someone enters the United States and how long they're allowed to stay here until. The people who generally receive an I-94 record are those who are entering on a visa, some sort of protected status like TPS, or parole is another example. U.S. citizens do not receive I-94 records, and in most cases, green card holders do not receive I-94 records. They are available online after someone enters the United States. And so if an employee is to present an I-94 record to you for the I-9 purposes, sometimes they do just print it off of the CBP website, and that is legitimate. So I have a few examples here from the USCIS website of what an I-94 record could look like. So this is one of the examples. This layout is a little bit outdated, but you can kind of see the general information it would include. So admit until date, their details of like their passport number, country of issuance. Here is another example that's a little bit more related to what it looks like currently on the CBP website. You can ignore the red text right now. That is just specifically for parolees who are arriving from Ukraine. So that's not relevant more generally. But you can see on the I-94 record, it's going to have the class of admission, admit until date, additional details that might be required for their particular status. Another type of I-94 record, which will have generally the same information, is when an I-94 record is on the bottom of an approval notice for some sort of status. So if someone's TPS status was approved, and like TPS is up in the air right now with a lot of changes that are happening, but that's just an example of one approval notice that could have a new I-94 record on the bottom of it that then trumps whatever is on the online version on the CBP website. Another example of an I-94 record on an approval notice is for certain parolee programs. So it could actually also be the record that is at the bottom of certain types of approval notices for an immigration temporary status. So when it comes to the I-9, the I-94 record can be accepted in certain circumstances. And to kind of understand when, you need to think back to the basics of why are you accepting documents at all for the I-9? And so essentially when you're completing the I-9, you're trying to establish two things. First, that employee's identity, and then second, their work authorization in the United States. So when you look at a List A document, that's going to be a document that can establish both. So the U.S., if it's a U.S. citizen, for example, and they provide a passport, all U.S. citizens have work authorization in the United States. So when they provide a passport, it has a picture of them, so you can establish their identity, and then they're establishing their citizenship with a U.S. passport, so you know they have work authorization. So that's a List A document because it does both things. Another type of List A is an EAD card. It has a photo of the employee, so you can verify their identity, and the EAD card is their work authorization. Then you also have the option for an employee to do a List B and C document combined. So List B documents establish identity only, so like a driver's license, Anybody can get a driver's license. It depends on the certain state requirements, but you don't need work authorization to get a driver's license. So that's why it only establishes identity with the photo. And then you combine it with a List C document that establishes work authorization, such as an unrestricted Social Security card. Restricted Social Security cards are different for different situations related to work authorization. So I'm just emphasizing an unrestricted Social Security card for these purposes. The key fact to remember is that the I-94 by itself never proves identity because there's no photo on it. So if someone's giving you an I-94 record, that should trigger that you're going to need something else because it can't be used by itself. So the first option for an I-94 record is actually the List A document, and that's when you are combining the I-94 record with the foreign passport. So the logic here is that their foreign passport carries the identity because it has a photo and you can establish that you can verify their identity. And then the I-94 record for certain types of statuses will establish their work authorization. There's some requirements to remember are that the names must match between the two documents. The I-94 needs to show an endorsement of the person's status. The endorsement is unexpired, and the job doesn't conflict with any restrictions on the form. There's also some categories that require a third piece, such as a school or program document, like an I-20. So I did discuss I-20s more specifically in a video in previous weeks, so you can definitely go back to learn more about that specifically, but just something to remember in the back of your mind. So for a List A document, just remember if there's providing an I-94 for List A, it needs to be accompanied by a foreign passport. Option 2 is the I-94 as a List C document. So the passport is now out of the picture, and now they're maybe providing a List B document. The I-94 is only carrying the work authorization, so it can only be List C. And again, the logic is certain people are work authorized because of their status itself. So the I-94 documenting that status is proof of work authorization. So when you pair it with a List B document, it's acceptable for the I-9 purposes. Whether the I-9 qualifies here depends on the specific class of admission printed on it, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that later on. So these I-94 records, it's very status specific. So this is just a high-level overview of how you can start figuring out if it's an acceptable document, but it is going to end up being status specific. You're not going to want to just assume. You're going to need to read the code and do a deeper analysis. You also want to look at the date the I-94 was issued because some older I-94s need to be accompanied by other notices from USCIS to work. So just a basic summary, if they're providing an I-94 for a List C document, they need to also provide a List B document. Now, the third option is when they want to provide an I-94 as a receipt. So this can come up when you are re-verifying a worker who perhaps their EAD expired and they want to provide their I-94 as a receipt. This is a third option. And the logic is the same for receipts for other documents. It's not that it's the real document itself, it's a temporary placeholder that buys the employee time. So the I-94 can be showed for very specific statuses, not all of them, only in limited circumstances. An I-94 can be used as a receipt to give them a 90-day extension when it comes to hiring or it's tied to an expiration and you're re-verifying them. At the end of that 90 days, the employee has to come back with either List A or List B and C documents. So if they are providing the I-94 as a receipt, you're on a deadline and you're going to need to recheck again in 90 days. A few things to just remember more generally. I-94 records have no photos, so it cannot be used alone. You're going to need something for identity. So List A, you need their foreign passport. List C, you need a List B document. You need to read the code, not the category. It's the class of admission on the I-94 record that controls, and similar sounding codes get treated differently. And it can be very specific to the immigration program. So I really want to emphasize here that if you're in a place where you're working, where your employees are providing I-94 records and you're really not sure, consult an immigration attorney because they are going to be tracking what's happening with all of these programs related to whether or not they can use an I-94 record as work authorization. So One example is TPS. There are situations when TPS approval notices with the new I-94 record on the bottom can be a List C document. However, TPS programs are a little bit up in the air right now. There's a lot changing. Last week, the Supreme Court did give DHS authorization to start terminating the TPS programs for Haiti and Syria. So that's going to be in the works. These are changes that are going to affect the documents for I-9 purposes. So when you're starting to do the I-9 and the I-94 record comes into play, definitely consult with an immigration attorney. The third thing to remember is that you cannot tell employees what documents to provide to you. This applies across the board for I-9s, but especially with the I-94 record. It can get a little bit confusing. You might want to start asking questions about their immigration status. What do they have pending? Those questions are not allowed because they could fall into anti-discrimination territory. And then asking for certain documents can also be unfair documentary practices. So you still have to stay within the same normal lines of I-9 compliance of, provide them the list of what they can show, what they can provide for the I-9, and then doing your analysis. You cannot ask for specific documents or for more questions about their work authorization. So the scenarios that I'm discussing today when it comes to the I-9 are essentially when the I-9 is valid for work authorization, which is not going to be the case in all situations for someone who has an I-94 record. Like I was explaining, it shifts very frequently. And on the availability of certain immigration programs, they're often sometimes very specific to the country of origin. So it's not something that, like, if they give you an I-94 record, it's automatic work authorization. It's only tied to specific statuses. So you want to work with an immigration attorney here. Some of the scenarios when you are looking at the different statuses are going to be a wildly different analysis. So it's really important that you have someone who understands the differences between parole and TPS, for example, and what's happening to those programs based on those specific countries. So the I-94 isn't just one document. It has 3 roles in the I-9 context. It could be List A with a passport. It can be List C when combined with List B, or it could be a receipt for very specific statuses. I hope that this helps clear the air for some of you. Again, my name is Emily Brown, founder and principal attorney of Elevate Justice U.S. Immigration Law. And apologies for the technical glitch earlier. I'm going to clean up the video so that you can watch this more clearly in the future. But thank you for spending this time with me on one of the least glamorous areas of immigration compliance. But there's a lot to know, to understand in I-9 compliance. So hope to see you next week, same time, same place. Have a great day, everybody.